Welcome to the new episode of the multiplayer tutorial inventory system. Today we're going to add the hotbar, similar to the main inventory, and change the control for opening and closing the inventory. This control can later be applied to other widgets. Let's get started. We start in the third-person character blueprint. First, we want to get the begin play event out of the collapsed input mapping. To do this, we create an output execution pin and connect the input execution pin to the caster player controller node. Then we delete the begin play event and go back to the event graph overview. Now we see that our input mapping has an execution pin and an output execution pin. We add the begin play event and connect the execution pin to the input mapping. Next, go to the content drawer and the widgets folder. Here, create a new folder named Inventory. Select all relevant files and move them to the new inventory folder for better organization. Now create a new user widget and name it WB_hotbar. Open it. Here we search for a size box and drag it onto the WB_hotbar widget. Set the values for min desired width to 550 and min desired height to 30. Then search for a border. Drag it onto the size box. Select it. Change the brush to black and the alpha value to 0.25. We set fill screen to desired on screen. Next, we search for a vertical box and move it to the border. Then we search for WB_slots container and drag it onto the vertical box. Select it, setting the size to fill. Now we click on Edit WB_slots container in the upper right corner to set the slots per row variable to public so that we can later specify how many slots we want in a row. We open the graph and click on the eye next to slots per row to make this variable public. We save the whole thing and go back to our WB_hotbar. Here we can now set the number of slots per row to 10. Now we go to our WB_slot_ container and select the scroll box. We rename it to scrollbox and mark it as a variable so that we can access it later. Then we go back to WB_hotbar and open the graph. Here we want to say that we want to hide the scroll box in the hotbar. We drag WB_slot_ container into the graph and get the scroll box with get scroll box. Search for set always show scrollbar. We connect the pins to the pre-construct event so that the change is already activated in the editor and not just when the game starts. We compile and save the whole thing and go back to the designer. Now we see that the scrollbar has disappeared. Now we have to specify the inventory from which the items are to be loaded into the hotbar. Let's go back to the graph and delete the tick event because we don't need it. We search for get owning player pawn and call our interface get character ref. This time we connect the execution pin from the construct event. Now we need to create our character's inventory component. To do that, we go to the BP_third-person character blueprint. We click on the plus symbol and search for our BPC_inventory component and select it. We rename it BPC_hotbar. Under slots amount, we can now specify how many slots our hotbar has. In our case, it is 10. We compile and save the whole thing and go back to our hotbar widget. Now we can read the BPC_hotbar component from the character. We drag the slots container into the graph and look for the set inventory ref function. Here we set our hotbar as the source for the items. Now let's take care of the main HUD. To do that, we go to the content drawer in the widgets folder and create a new user widget that we call WB_main HUD. Let's open it. For the main HUD, we first need a canvas panel, which we drag onto the main HUD. Now we search for a background blur, which we drag onto the canvas panel. We rename it to background blur and set it as a variable. We set the end course to full screen by holding down Shift and Control and left-clicking on this area. We set the blur strength to 10. Then we search for the WB_Hotbar widget we created and drag it onto the canvas panel. Select it and set the end course to bottom center while also holding down Control and Shift. Activate the Size to Content checkbox and set the Y position to -70 so that we have the hotbar in the bottom center of the screen. Now we go to the graph of the main HUD. We delete the tick event and the pre-construct event. Then we create a new event, which we call Change Blur Screen. This has an input parameter called enabled of type bool. We drag the background blur variable into the graph and search for the set visibility function. We grab the invisibility pin and pull it out. Search for select. Connect the enabled pin to the wildcard index. If enabled is false, the background blur should be hidden, otherwise we leave it visible. We connect the execution pins and call the change blur screen event we just created in the event construct. We set enabled to false so that the background blur is hidden by default when the game starts. Now we have to add the main HUD to the viewport. To do that, we go to our MyPlayer controller. We open the one we saved under third-person blueprints and make some changes here. First, in the Begin Play event, we create a widget and select the WB_Main HUD widget we just created. We promote it to a variable, which we call Main HUD, and add this widget to the viewport with Add to Viewport. Now we select our inventory widget variable and rename it to Opened Widget and change the data type to User Widget. We open the WB_inventory widget. We will make some visual and technical changes to the WB_inventory widget. We will delete the background blur because we have already moved it to the main HUD and delete the associated border. Then we select the size box and uncheck the width override checkbox. We check the min desired width checkbox and set the min and max desired width to 450 and 600 respectively. Now we select the overlay. Change the position Y to -110 and position X to 160. Now we go to the graph and want to make further changes there. First, we remove the close inventory function because it should no longer be controlled by the widget but by the MyPlayer controller. To do this, we create a new interface function in the content drawer in the interfaces folder in our BPI_player controller blueprint and call it close open widget. The function has an input value called key of type structure key. We compile and save the whole thing. Back in MyPlayer controller, we now call the close open widget interface. We drag the open widget variable into the graph and select convert to validated get to make sure we only retrieve valid widgets. In the inventory widget, we open the onKeyDown function, select all the nodes we find there and copy them with Ctrl+C. Then we go back to the player controller and paste them here. We connect the pins and make sure that the input processing now works correctly. We also add a function so that we can close all widgets with the escape key, regardless of the key used to open them. To do this, we compare the press key with the escape key. We connect this to an OR node, which also checks the tab input value. If either the tab or the escape key is pressed, the widget is closed. We connect the result of the OR node to the branch. If this query returns true, we close the widget and remove the blue screen. After we close the widget, we need to change our mouse mode to game only. We do this with our Change Mouse Mode UI function. At the end, we make sure that the blue screen is shown when the inventory is opened and hidden when it is closed. Oh yes, we forgot to create the IMC default variable in which our input action is stored. Right-click on it and select Create Variable IMC Default. After clicking on Compile, you can set the default value to IMC_default. We comment on the event begin play as an init main HUD widget. We comment on the interface for closing the widget as a close open widget. After that, we go back to our WB_inventory_widget and tidy it up. We now delete all nodes, pull them together a bit, and search for Get Player Controller. For the controller, we call up the Close Open Widget interface, grab the one in Key Event pin, pull it out and call up Get Key to connect the pins. Now we go to the EventCraft overview and can delete the original Close Inventory function completely because we have now outsourced it to the MyPlayer controller. We also delete the IMC default variable because it is no longer needed here. Now we test the whole thing. We click on play, open the inventory and see that the background blue is not displayed. We close it, go back to the MyPlayer controller and tick the checkbox next to change blue screen when the inventory is opened. We save and test again. We press play, open the inventory and the blue screen is now visible. We close the inventory, give ourselves a few items and open it again. We drag a pumpkin to the hotbar and see that it works. If we now press the tab key, we see that the inventory does not close and the slot boxes have a blue border. Every time we press tab, we switch to the next slot. This is because we have still activated the focus for the slot box buttons. We close the whole thing and go to the WB_item slot master widget. Select the button on the left and uncheck the Is Focusable checkbox. Then we go to the WB_inventory widget, open the OnKeyDown function, select these nodes and copy them. Now go to the WB_main HUD widget and create the OnKeyDown function here using overwrite. If you open the inventory in the game and click somewhere outside the inventory box, the focus will switch to the main HUD. And this is where we need to catch the keyboard input as well. We insert all the nodes here and connect the pins. Then we go to the designer and select WB_main HUD on the left and tick the Is Focusable checkbox. If this checkbox is not ticked, the widget is not given focus and the OnKeyDown function is not called. This means that the focus moves on to the next widget, in our case, WB_inventory, and the keyboard input is only intercepted there. This means that you have to press the tab key twice, or the escape function will not work because the OnKeyDown function is not triggered. Now let's try it all over again. We get the items twice, open the inventory, move some items to the hotbar, close it and give us the items again. Grab the stack of stones and drag them to the 20 in the hotbar. We can now drag the items back and forth as we like and it works. This basically completes the basic function of our inventory. That's it for this episode. In the next episode, we'll start building our storage box. If you want more features, have any suggestions, or want to make a suggestion, please let me know in the comments and I'll see how I can help. If you liked it, please leave a like or a subscription if you don't want to miss any more episodes. Thanks for watching and see you next time.